Hello and welcome to Learning Music with Pat. I want to go into the types of instruments, how they're made, and what would be the best instrument for you to pick out. Supposing that you're an adult and you want to pick out an instrument for a child, or you're going to be a beginning student. Instruments are made out of wood, plastics, hard rubber, and metal as a general rule. Being shiny and bright, which the flutes usually are if they're new, isn't an indication that the flute is good or not good. You can't base it upon that. But is wood better? Wood instruments are considered to be more expensive and require more care than regular instruments that are made out of metal or plastics. But professional people prefer wood if they can get it. As I said, they're more expensive. I have a clarinet that's a top-notch French make. It's called a cabaret, and it's one of the top-notch instruments made in France, and it's made out of wood. And I found that what I wanted to do was to put oil on it every so often because the wood needed to absorb the oil. I was afraid of the wood cracking if I didn't oil it every so often. There are special oils made for wooden instruments. And so I bought these oils, which were fairly expensive. And in order to do a clarinet, with a clarinet, some of it, I don't have an instrument here to show you, but some of the pads and keys remain closed. When you press a key, it'll open, but normally it lays shut. For those keys that lay shut normally, unless they are touched in order to open them up, I would take little pieces of plastic. I actually would take bags and cut little pieces of plastic, lift the key up, and put the plastic under the key so that when I put the oil down through the barrel and through the bore of the instrument, it wouldn't touch the pads because it would be damaging to the pads. The other keys that would stand up normally, that would be all right. I would just leave them up because they weren't going to get the oil anyway. And then I'd put some oil on the outside of the instrument, just here and there. And I put it on top of a piano, laid them all the parts out, and let them absorb everything they could. And that was good for the instrument. Now, a lot of the wooden recorders, you don't have to do that, and some of them have a glaze on it, so you wouldn't be able to do it anyway because they wouldn't absorb the oil. So professional instruments, you can get professional instruments and you can get student models. Which is better? Which is best? Well, if you're going to end up by playing in a symphony and going on tour, and this is going to be your life's work, then you should probably get a professional instrument. But most people, they're not going to be in that kind of a situation. They're going to be players. They're going to maybe be very advanced players, but they're not planning to join a professional outfit that's going to be touring. And so therefore, I think for most people, the way they play, even the advanced students, the way they play, I think most of them, you can get a student model instrument, and that's good enough. A student model instrument is very well made, and they play very well, and they pitch very well, and some of them are specially made to be stronger because students will be using them and students can get careless with them. So they're made with that in mind as well. The pitch is good, the tone is good. You can play anything with them. You can play anything that you would play in a symphony orchestra, but you don't have the refinement of some of the parts that a professional instrument will have. Now I'm going to give you an example of that. I'm going to put up my flute picture. I've had it in here before. And I hope you can kind of follow me along here as I do this. All of these little places, it looks like they're circles, those are the keys. Now, on a professional model, on some professional models, there are keys within the keys. So there'd be a little key in here, a little key in here. So you've got the outer and inner key. And sometimes you could take and press a button and all of the inner keys come out. They just raise up. And what do you get? You get holes where they were. So you actually have an open-holed flute. Now, open-holed flutes are considered to be more expensive and nicer than regular closed-hole flutes, because most of the holes, when you're using a flute, most of these keys will just close. And the thing about them is that when they raise up, then you get your fingers on those holes where they were. Now, is that good? It's considered to be very good, because they figure if you have an open-holed instrument, and so you're getting your fingers in, and the air is going past your fingers, the quality of the tone might be better than if you have everything closed. Usually in a flute, a regular flute, all the keys close, and then you open what you need to, but the keys themselves will be closed. With this particular flute, it has like a subset of keys right in the regular keys, and they lift up, and when you press a certain lever, they lift up, and you have an open-holed keyboard. It's a fingerboard. On a piano, we're talking about keyboards, but when you're talking about where the tone holes of an instrument, that's called a fingerboard. So those come up, and this all becomes open-holed, and it's considered to be better, a little better for the tone. Now, if you're a professional player and you're touring with a symphony, that's important, because it's got to be perfect as you can get it. If it's usual playing, and say you're in a dance band or whatever, and that's tricky music to play, but you don't have to have the best of the best to play it. What makes the Stradivarius violins so good? They're all made out of wood, but there are a lot of violins that are made out of wood. What makes them better? That anyone who has a Stradivarius has got something that's got a beautiful, rich, deeper tone than what an average violin can get. Now, average violins get beautiful tones, but the Strads are supposed to be a cut above. So what happened that made the Stradivarius violins so good? Nobody knows for sure, but it's thought that the wood, they're all handmade out of wood. It's thought that the wood that they came from an area of the globe where it was much, much colder than normal for a series of years. And so the wood had a different kind of tonal quality to it than the wood that's used in other violins. There's a whole section of the globe where wood was taken to make the Stradivarius violins. And so their tone is a little better, a little deeper, a little richer, and it's because the tonal quality was changed by the wood, because it went through a series of years where it was very, very cold, colder than normal, and it's considered that might be the reason for the change in the Stradivarius. But there are a lot of instruments that are made out of wood. My Cabart, which is an excellent clarinet, is made out of wood. How do they make a wooden clarinet? Well, they cut wood about the size and shape of the clarinet. It would be about yay long and about yay wide. This is the way a clarinet is. And then it's like a long rectangular piece of wood about the same dimensions as a clarinet is. And then they put it in oil. And they can keep it in oil for months. They can keep it in oil for years. And it absorbs all of the oil. And as the wood absorbs the oil, it gets a dark color to it, eventually a black color. It's taken on the characteristics and color of the oil. Now, I don't know how long they stay, but until they feel that it's soaked up enough oil. And then they start to cut out the pieces where the keys are going to go and things like that, and they add what they have to. Once in a while, you'll get a clarinet that's brownish, and you can see the wood. You can see the layering of the wood underneath it. You know, it has like a pattern to it. And it's very pretty, but the reason that it's brown instead of black is that it has not soaked in the oil as long. For oil, for a soaked instrument, if it stays in long enough, it will look black, just like the black plastic clarinets. So which is better? I think for most students, and I think even for most players who do a lot of playing, but may not be professional, they may not consider themselves professional, that they can use the plastics or the hard rubber instruments, and they can do just fine, because there's nothing you can't play with them. And they do have a good tone, and they do pitch well, and there's no reason why they can't be used as successfully as a professional instrument. I think the only time you would need a professional instrument would be if you are going to be going on tour with a professional group and music is going to be your career. That's how you're going to make your living, and you're going to be on tour with orchestras, and you really have to have it right, as perfect as you can. Then, of course, a professional instrument is warranted. Other than that, I think the student models are just fine. When I've taught my students, and I was on staff at a fine arts center, and I was the woodwind specialist for a fine arts center for years, I always use the student model instruments, and I just did fine with them, because there's nothing wrong with them. Once in a while, you'll get one that might be a little bit off. I had a saxophone student. He got a brand new instrument, and it was, I'm not going to mention the name, I'm not going to mention the brand name, but when he got it, I mean, it's a well-known name, it's considered to be one of the top-notch instruments for saxophones, and when he got it, he could only play 3 notes. He says, I don't know what's wrong with me, Miss Rainey, I can only play 3 notes. So I tried it. I could only play 3 notes, and there was something wrong with the way they had structured the alignment of the keys. You could only play 3 notes. So they sent that instrument back, and they replaced it with another instrument. Same problem. He could only play 3 notes. I could only play 3 notes. That instrument had to go back. The instrument had to go back 2 or 3 times until they finally got one, which was a student model, and it worked fine. What they had tried to do was to change the way the keys operated with one another, and they'd messed it up somehow, and the instrument couldn't play right. When he got one of the older models, it was still pretty new, but a little older model that used a different alignment of the keys, it was fine. You could play anything on it. Since that time, I've not recommended that people get that instrument, because parents will come to me and say, what should I get for my child? And I make sure that they don't get that one, because they might get stuck again. So student models are fine. And if you're playing most of the time, you will have your instrument with closed holes. They won't be open, and they'll probably be metal or hard rubber or plastic, usually plastic. And the tone is fine, the intonation is fine, and there's no reason why you can't do very well with it. And you don't want to buy an instrument that's too cheap, because what's going to happen if it doesn't work well, then a student's going to get discouraged. I can't play this. I can't learn to play this. No matter what I do, it doesn't work right, and they're going to want to stop. But you don't have to buy the most expensive either. What I've done many times is I've gone into a music store, and I've been fortunate because they knew I was teaching music, and I'd say to them, I've got a student who's going to be buying an instrument from this store, a flute, let's say. I need to check all of your flutes to see which is going to be the best student model for her or him. And they always let me do it. So I'd sanitize an instrument, and I'd be playing away, and I'd choose what I think would be the best. And I chose some very good instruments that worked out very well. And they were all student models. So you just need to remember that. One thing I want you to remember, and this is, I think, kind of critical, if you are playing woodwinds, you should not be playing brass. Or if you are playing brass, you should not be playing woodwinds. I was going to mention that last segment, and I forgot to do it. How come? Your mouth is composed of muscles, and the muscles have to be set just right, and it forms the embouchure, so you keep the you keep the instrument in your mouth, and you can just focus on the right set of muscles, and the muscles develop so that you can play that instrument well. When you first start out, you don't have a clear embouchure. It takes time to build it up. And then when it's built up, you can play longer and longer periods of time and not be worried about your embouchure. Excuse me once again. Now, if you decide that you're going to play brass, you're going to weaken your woodwind embouchure. If you're playing brass, you decide you want to bring in a woodwind, you're going to weaken your brass embouchure. It's going to be harder for you to keep the muscles in the position that they need to be to play the instrument. You may weaken an embouchure enough that you have to start off from scratch. So that's not a good thing. So just keep in mind, although I've met 2 or 3 people that say they can do it without a problem, I suspect they're not playing very long at a time in each instrument. Generally speaking, the brass uses a certain set of muscles built up so you can blow into it a certain way. That's the embouchure all around the mouth. The woodwinds have a certain type of embouchure, and you have a certain set of muscles, and they're built up in a certain way, so when you get it strengthened and you get it set, you can play longer and longer and longer and longer, and it doesn't bother you at all. The lips don't feel weak, you don't feel tired, and you can play for a very long time, and it doesn't bother you. But if I, as a person who plays woodwinds, saxophone, clarinet, flute, oboe, bassoon, and a number of other instruments, decide I'm going to play trombone, then I'm going to weaken the embouchure for the woodwinds, and it's going to be harder and harder for me to do the woodwinds because I've weakened the muscles that I need for the embouchure. So just keep that in mind. I was in a restaurant eating with some friends, and a little girl and her father were toward the end of their meal, and they were going to go and pay for their lunches. And I heard him say, well, she wants to play trombone now. And she's very good at music, she's very gifted at music, and she's playing this instrument, this instrument, this instrument. Now she wants to play trombone. And I was there, and I talked with him, and I said, it would be better if she didn't, and this is the reason why. And I explained about the embouchure and what happens. If she wants to play an instrument, another instrument, that's fine. She's already playing 2 or 3. It's all right to do that, but you need to choose an instrument that's not going to be opposed to the embouchure that you've already developed. So it would be all right to play flute, clarinet, saxophone, oboe, bassoon, but don't add a brass instrument to it. Or it would be all right to play trumpet, trombone, French horn, all brass instrument, but don't add a trombone, don't add a clarinet to it, because embouchures are fussy and you have to build them up over time. So I just wanted to make sure that you understood that. I just made some notes here. So you want to know more about practicing, take it one note at a time, take it one measure at a time, look at the music. When you get the music all done and you can play it together and it's all right, then you can start thinking about what's the tempo going to be, how fast do I want to play this, you know, what are the expression, what are the dynamics, and so forth. Now, I'm going to take this off. Take some of this off, and I'm going to show you some other music. How would you practice, just to get back to what I was originally doing, how would you practice a piece like this? Now, this is going to be harder to see, and I'm going to flip over a couple of pages because it's about the same. Now, when you get a music with 3, this is a 3 staffs, and they're all connected. Here's a treble clef, here's a treble clef, here's a bass clef. So you have 2 treble clefs and a bass clef. Now the treble clef and the bass clef are connected by a kind of bracket. They are played together. That would be probably an organ playing or a piano playing. And this top part here is the solo part. Someone would either be singing it, or they might possibly be playing an instrument. And so therefore, they would have this as a solo part. Now, one thing that you're probably not going to be able to see because I haven't magnified it, this part, which is a treble part for the piano or whoever's accompanying, either piano, keyboard, or organ, that follows this. The notes up here are exactly the same, for the most part, as the notes right here. This D matches this D. This C matches this C. Those are alto parts. The running parts are alto parts. Here's this E is going to be like this E. Here's a half note E. Here's a half note E. So the solo part is just the soprano part of this accompanying part. So, but you do have those three, and it all goes together. And here again, you would practice it the same way. You'd be practicing, if you're a piano player or an organ player, you'd be practicing this part here. If you are a soloist, you're practicing that part. And you do it the same way, one measure at a time, one note at a time. If you're having difficulty, then you put it all together. And when you get it up to all together, then you can start thinking about, how do I increase the speed? Do I want it faster? How fast is it supposed to go? And you have all kinds of dynamic things. Look at these two little carrots right here. I'm going to explain as carrots. Here's a soft part. You gradually get louder. Here's a louder part, you gradually get softer. This here is a phrase mark. It's not a slur, it's a phrase mark. All of this music kind of goes together like a sentence. But then you do have you do have a tie, like here to here, where you tongue one note and you don't tongue another, and you add them all together as if they were one note, even though they're not. So there's a lot that you can learn by using music and just observing music and seeing what it's like. And so therefore, I brought in different types of music so you can understand that, so you can see it for yourself and see what it's like. Now, for people who are playing recorders, you're only playing one note at a time, and so this would be relevant. You could probably play this if you could squeeze in an E flat. The B flat's not a problem, but squeezing in the E flat might be a little problem. You could play this, and it says right here, soprano, allegro. This thing gets faster and faster as it goes along. So at any rate, I just want to show you, and I want you to be made aware of various things about music. When should a child learn how to play music? Well, if you're talking about brass and woodwind, where part of the mouthpiece goes in the mouth, you need to maybe check with a dentist. Maybe you can't learn to play very well until the second teeth have come in. If it's a flute, that's not such an issue because you don't put the flute in your mouth, you put it underneath your lip. But I always check. If I have a student that's wearing braces, you see, there's still some pressure there. If I have a student that's wearing braces, I always have them check with the dentist to see if the dentist feels that they are ready and would they be able to learn how to play various instruments, or would it be putting too much pressure on their teeth? So far, any child that's had a health problem that we've checked out, that I send them to their doctor, can they learn how to play an instrument? Is it going to be too much for their lungs? Like, see if they have asthma or something like that. And I've never had a doctor say, oh, don't play, it's going to be too much. Even children with braces, I've taught, the tone on the flute isn't that great while the braces are on. That's understandable. But at the same time, the dentists have given the okay. And for a child with asthma that I had, they said that it was fine. It would actually be good for them to play and exercise the lungs. So there are certain considerations you have to make. I see we're pretty much out of time, so I've gone over just some basic things. The way that instruments are made, which is better, wooden or metal, which is better, professional or student model. For the most part, student models are fine. Most people who play instruments end up by playing more than one. It's not unusual for a saxophonist, and this is where I got my initial training, to also play clarinet and flute. You know, it's just not unusual at all. Do you need extra instruments? Many people have an extra spare instrument, so if they have to send one out for repair, they have an instrument as a backup. And that's a good idea if you're going to do a lot of playing. You know, if you have an extra instrument. I've got over 300. I may not need that many, but it's good to have an instrument as a spare if you're going to do a lot of playing, just in case something goes wrong or a spring gets out of place or you need to have some pads replaced. You have an instrument to replace it. If you're doing a lot of playing, I would suggest that you try to do that. And the student models are fine. So I'm going to close it here. We'll be doing something else next time. Please join me then.